So we're doing the mechanisms of microevolution, and we have our textbook open to section 9 in chapter 13. And we'll just go over these main concepts right here, 1 through 4, that we skipped over while we were doing the 5 fingers of evolution. So what is a population? Hey, let me ask you a question. You know what the population of the United States is for people? Kind of an interesting number to know. Anybody have a clue? How about the population of the world? What is it? 7 billion? I think we're very close to 8 if we're not there yet. We're right there. So 8 billion people. When I was in high school, it was 4 billion. And then when I was in college, 5 billion and so on. So it's like this exponential growth. So we're almost at 8. It'll only take another 10 years to get to 9 and maybe another 25 years to get to 10. What's the population that the world can handle? You ever think about that? Have you heard of a number? I think it's around 15 billion. And then we'll be kind of out of space, out of food, that type of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of traffic now. There's a lot of competition for real estate. That's what makes certain states near the ocean so expensive, because they're not making any more land. So it's more competition. So the world's population is pretty large. What is it in the United States? Yeah, somebody could have Googled it by now. It's somewhere around 330 million. What is it here in Los Angeles? Pretty big city. 330 million in the US. I think it was about 3 million in Los Angeles area. So I've spent some time talking to you about populations. So what is the definition of a population? All the individuals in a species. So you can see that I highlighted it over here in the textbook. A group of individuals of the same species is a population. So you're going to write that in for number 1. Anyone find the answer for 2? Does evolution happen at the individual level or at the population level? Yes? Population level is correct, and that was right down underneath the picture. In studying evolution at the population level, so from the video that we just watched, we learned that a gene pool is where evolution happens. So if you have a change in the entire population, and really referring to all the genes in the population, then you can get microevolution, which can lead to a formation of a new species, macroevolution. So I've thrown out the word gene pool. We saw it in the video, and it's right there. All the genes in a population is a gene pool. So they talked about it at the, right there. They focus on a gene pool, which is all copies of every type of allele at every location of all the chromosomes, all piled up together. So what would be the gene pool for humans? Let's call it 8 billion. And then how many genes does each individual have? 22,000 genes. So do the number 8 billion times 22,000. That's the human gene pool. What is microevolution? Well, we saw it in the video. A change in the gene pool is microevolution. So 4 easy answers right there. So if you don't have this type of studying down yet, after you're done with this worksheet, come back to it tomorrow or before our next class. Why not look at a blank one? And you should say, population, all the individuals. Evolution happens at the population. Gene pool is all the genes in a population. Microevolution is a change in the gene pool. So practice it a little bit instead of going to a website and distracting yourself. Being at a website to play a game, watching videos. Try this out. Grade yourself on how distracted you are during the school day and in your classes. How about your A class? Do you spend really good attention because you're interested in the topic? All right, probably good attention because you have an A, and that's why you have an A, because you pay attention. The two go hand in hand, right? And now if you have a C in a class, maybe you get easily distracted and frustrated, and then you just don't follow through on figuring out the answers. So as a student, you got to figure out what makes you tick, what makes you learn. One of our ISOs over there is being able to be a self-learner and being able to teach yourself things and having the discipline to do so. So that's part of becoming a monarch. Let's move ahead and pick up some speed here. We're switching over to section 12 in the textbook. And we're going to fill out this chart. In 1 or 2 words, describe what natural selection is, genetic drift, and gene flow. I'm going to walk around the room and see you quickly write down the answer that you can write down from these paragraphs. It didn't give you much space, so try to do this in 5 words or less. Describe natural selection, describe genetic drift, and gene flow in the top part of this chart in a way that you will remember it. Don't just write down the book stuff because it won't stick with you. Now, if you're struggling, think back to the 5 fingers of evolution. You got all this in the video, and you wrote down 1 or 2 words on the fingers. Angel, which of the fingers is natural selection? Where did you write the word natural selection on the note? Natural selection, what finger is that? All right, good. For natural selection, write down the description that it's adaptation. That you are adapted to your environment. Remember our butterfly lab? If you were yellow butterfly on a yellow background, you were well adapted and camouflaged to survive, to pass on your genes. So the thumb is natural selection. If nature gives you a thumbs up because you can run faster, swim faster, so I highlighted it. Notice in the textbook it says natural selection. And since they've already talked about it earlier, they didn't really have the bold word. It's on another page. But I wrote down more efficient. So an adaptation means that you're more efficient at whatever that skill would be so that you could survive. And that's called fitness. If you're the best, you have the highest fitness. If you are not good at being camouflaged, you have low fitness and a low chance of surviving. So then up here it said no natural selection. That would mean all individuals are equal, but with nature selecting the variety, because you're not all the same, then some are favored and some are not favored. So you write down the example of your butterfly lab. And the description here is adaptations give you high fitness. So write down those 2 or 3 words that you can key in on. And now what about genetic drift? Cassandra, which finger is genetic drift? So you could write down in this box, this is the pinky. As long as you know what the pinky is, what did you write down in the pinky?
Population.
Right. So down here, you would see that I highlighted a chance event. What can happen by chance? An earthquake, a flood, get hit by a meteor, right? A forest fire that you can't outrun. So when populations shrink drastically due to some chance event, that is genetic drift. So the examples, I kind of gave you a natural disaster shrinking the population. So now you only have a subset. Remember in the video it showed only 4 survivors and they're like all bandaged up and on crutches and they crawl over. They're crawling over the pinky like how we made it. We're the survivors. We could pass on our genes. And now how about gene flow? Which finger is the gene flow? Dalton, you know? Correct. Movement, and you may have even written down the word gene flow on the finger, right? On the pointer finger. So you're going to write down gene flow when individuals come or go. The word is immigrate or emigrate, and they take their genes with them. So scrolling down here, a population can gain or lose alleles when fertile individuals move in or out of the population. And I think that's a lot to write down in a small box. So what you write down under gene flow would be pointer finger movement. And the examples would be Charles Darwin's finches. They left the mainland of South America and they flew over to an island. Was it 300 or 600 miles out there? So it's not like they do that very often. It was sort of like they got blown over there from a storm or something. And now they are the founders that are going to grow a whole new population. Question 7. Maybe you've seen this. Has anyone traveled on the interstate and seen signs that say all boats exit here for inspection? Between states, they're very concerned about boaters accidentally carrying weeds on their propellers, carrying invasive species in the bilge and the bottom of their boats. All boats leak a little bit and they collect water. So there's pumps that will pump it out, or you have to pull the drain plug and then let the water drain out, and then when they dry out, those species die. But if they're not going to check their boats, they go from one lake to another or one state to another, and then they back their boat in, and now they put that weed into a lake. I've seen perfectly healthy blue water lakes turn into green swamps. It kills all the fish when an invasive weed called a milfoil gets a hold of the bottom of the lake and grows like crazy and smothers all the other plants that the fish needed for shelter and food. And so the fish die out, get diseased, and it totally destroys the ecosystem of the lake to the point where they can't get it back. And it's sad. So their best defense is to inspect every boat that goes into a lake. And so what did I describe? What mechanism, microevolution, are we talking about here? What finger is it? Correct. It's the pointer finger. It's gene flow, movement of an animal or a plant into an area where they were not before. And in some cases, when they can outcompete, they're called an invasive species. And you got to really watch out for that. All right, take a look at number 8. And it is describing a bottleneck defect. And there's the picture in the notes. That's a really good analogy. A bottle, I mean, if it was a beaker that was as wide at the top as it is at the bottom, you tip that over and all of them will come out. But if you fill this with marbles and then you tip it over for 3 seconds, only a few marbles are going to come out. And this describes a disaster. So this is the pinky. This is gene flow, where you are restricting the genes going to the next generation by a wildfire, by a storm like a hurricane, wiping all the anole lizards off of the island. Wasn't that interesting when those guys went to a small little island and realized that the storm surge just killed everything off, and so they repopulated the island. All right. So bottleneck defect is part of genetic drift when you only have few individuals surviving some limiting disaster. And then a founder effect, that is just like its name applies. You have new individuals coming into an area like the Pilgrims coming from England on the Mayflower over to the East Coast, forming colonies. And if you didn't have more immigration, then their genes would populate the entire U.S. That's genetic drift. And then we're going to finish together with the thumb, natural selection. It acts on the variety of individuals. So if you look at a population right here, here's a population of mice. The way they look is called the phenotype. So you have white mice, black mice, and then you have the average, which are gray. So here's a distribution, percentage of all the individuals. This would be about 75% of the individuals are going to be gray. 5% are white, 5% are dark. What does that leave it? Maybe 10% in between, a light gray, 10% dark gray. This is called a normal distribution. This is called a bell curve. It happens in nature, it happens in finance, it happens whenever you have a variety in a population. So this is the way it should be. But what if nature is now going to give an advantage to a dark mouse? because the environment turns black, and so they're better camouflage. Remember that peppered moth example where it favored the dark ones because now the trees are black? That's called directional selection. When the bell curve is directed toward the right or to the left. When it favors one of the extremes, it's called directional selection. If it favors the middle and it even helps the middle and kills off the extremes, this is called stabilizing because it's stabilizing it to only like one type instead of having a variety with the extremes. In the example here, it's a really interesting example. It's human birth weight. It's really unhealthy for the mother, especially before a lot of surgical procedures, for her to have a heavy child. If they were born, I'm not sure exactly what the birth weight would be. Is it 10 pounds, 11 pounds like this? The survival rate for the mother dying at childbirth was pretty high because the baby's head would not fit to the birth canal, and so it would cause life-threatening for the baby and for the mother. If the baby is too light, like 3 or 4 pounds, then that's also not good because they might have been premature. That's why they're so young and they're not fully developed. So you have lower chance of survival if they're too heavy and too small as a baby. So it's really helping the middle weight of the baby. So a lot of babies are born between 6 and 8 pounds. So that is called stabilizing selection. And then the only other option is let's favor the extremes and the average is not favored. So white mice and black mice, for example. But they also give an example down here with finches in Africa with their beak size. So if you had an average sized beak, you were not very likely to survive. You could only eat soft seeds or really hard seeds with your delicate beak or with your really strong beak like a parrot. And so you see all three of these types of natural selection forces. You will see this chart on the test, and so you want to be able to describe what stabilizing, what directional, and disruptive selection is. So with that, I'm going to leave the rest up to you. You've got a good amount of time. You have 25 minutes to complete the last of the questions. And do so that you don't have any homework. This is a good use of your class time. So use your textbook. It tells you where to find the answers. And realize that this is part of your study guide for the upcoming quiz next week.